7:15 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. An American B-52 Stratofortress, call sign Scalpel 6-1, banked slowly over the dark waters of the Taiwan Strait. This was not a standard freedom of navigation flight. Scalpel 6-1 was flying completely alone, without its usual protective screen of F-35 fighters or electronic warfare support. The crew did not know if they were a show of force or a calculated piece of bait. The sky was a pale, bruising purple as the sun struggled to break through a heavy layer of Pacific mist. Below the aircraft, the water was a textured slate gray, hiding the most contested shipping lanes in the world. The massive bomber felt heavy and permanent in the thin air at 30,000 feet. It was a relic of the Cold War, carrying the technology of the future, and today, it was testing a very specific theory. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was clinical. The hum of the 8 engines was a constant, vibrating backdrop to the mission. Captain Elias Miller adjusted his oxygen mask and glanced at his primary flight display. They were 3 minutes away from the first designated turn point. The pilot spoke into his headset. Electronic Warfare Officer. Report status of mainland search sweeps. The Electronic Warfare Officer, or EWO, sat in the cramped, windowless lower deck of the bomber. He watched a series of glowing green and amber displays. Captain, I have multiple search signatures from the mainland. We have 3 early warning sites tracking us. They are using standard power levels. It is the same signature we saw on the last 2 passes. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Chen, checked the navigation computer. We are holding at 30,000 feet. Airspeed is 400 knots. We are exactly where they expect us to be. This was the mission. The B-52 was flying a predictable, high-profile track. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the coastal defense networks of the People's Liberation Army to lock onto them. For weeks, intelligence suggested a new fire control logic was being integrated into the mainland missile batteries. Scalpel 6-1 was the sensor designed to catch it in the act. Hundreds of miles to the west, on a rugged section of the Chinese coastline, a mobile missile battery moved into a clearing. This was a long-range surface-to-air missile unit. The vehicles were camouflaged against the dark earth and low scrub of the hills. Inside the command van, the air was cool and smelled of ozone and electronics. A Chinese radar technician spoke to his commander. The target is maintaining altitude. Range is 200 kilometers. Bearing is 085. The commander leaned over the technician's shoulder. His face was illuminated by the blue light of the tactical display. Continue to track with the search radar. Do not transition to target illumination yet. We will wait until they reach the turn point. The technician nodded. The Americans are flying without escorts today. This is unusual. The commander did not respond immediately. He watched the small, pulsing icon that represented the B-52. It was a giant, slow-moving target. It looked vulnerable. They are inviting us to look at them. We will give them what they want. Prepare the fire control sequence, but keep the system in standby. Back inside the cockpit of Scalpel 6-1, Captain Miller felt a slight vibration in his control column. It was a ghost of a feeling, probably just turbulence from the heavy air. But he had been flying these missions for 12 years. He knew the difference between the weather and a threat. The pilot keyed his radio. Scalpel 6-1 to Pacific Command. We are approaching Point Alpha. All systems are green. The environment is currently stable. The response from the ground station in Guam was crisp. Copy. Scalpel 6-1. Continue your track. We are monitoring the spectrum from here. Good hunting. Miller looked out the window at the horizon. The sun was finally cresting the edge of the world, casting long, golden streaks across the clouds. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was exactly the kind of morning where a single mistake could change the course of a century. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:21 in the morning. The edge of the Taiwan Strait. The environment inside the B-52 changed in an instant. The steady, rhythmic hum of the cockpit was interrupted by a high-pitched, warbling tone. It was the threat warning receiver. On the electronic warfare display, a new symbol appeared. It was a circle with a small vertical line through it. This was the universal symbol for a fire control radar. The electronic warfare officer spoke urgently. "Captain, we have a transition. A ground-based battery has shifted from search mode. They are looking for a track." Captain Miller gripped the control yoke. He did not change his course. "Confirm the source. Is it the Hainan site we identified earlier?" The EWO checked the digital signatures. "Negative. This is a mobile unit. The signal is coming from the coast near Shantou. The power output is high. They are trying to burn through our passive shielding." In the back of the aircraft, the navigator felt the temperature in the cabin seem to rise. They were deep in the transit corridor now. "Captain, should we initiate the defensive turn?" "We are inside their primary engagement envelope." Miller shook his head. "Negative. We stay on the track. If we turn now, we give them the data they want. We need to see if they are willing to hold a lock on an unarmed aircraft." 120 miles away, inside the Chinese command van, the atmosphere was thick with focus. The battery commander stood behind the radar operator. The blue light of the tactical screens reflected in his eyes. He saw the American bomber maintaining its course. To him, it looked like an act of defiance. The operator reported the status. "Target is steady at 30,000 feet. I have a 70% confidence on the return." The Americans are not jamming yet. They are holding their electronic silence. The commander spoke with a cold, measured tone. "They are testing our resolve. They believe we will only paint them for a few seconds. They think this is a game of tag. We will show them something different. Power up the main array. Transition to active targeting." The operator hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Sir, if we lock them, their systems will record our pulse repetition frequency. We will lose the secret of our new waveform." The commander leaned in. "The order is given. Lock the target. Do not let go until I say so." A series of switches were flipped. On the roof of the command vehicle, the massive radar dish snapped into a new position. It was no longer searching the sky. It was pointing directly at a single, moving point in space. Inside the cockpit of Scalpel 6-1, the warbling tone changed. It became a steady, piercing scream. This was the sound of a lethal threat. It meant that somewhere on the ground, a computer had calculated a precise firing solution. A missile battery was now slaved to their position. The co-pilot looked at the master warning light. "Captain, we are painted. We are officially a target." Miller looked at the digital clock on his dashboard. The seconds were ticking away. He expected the lock to break. Most warning locks lasted 5 or 10 seconds. It was a tactical handshake, a way of saying, "I see you." But the scream of the alarm did not stop. 10 seconds passed. 15. 20. The EWO's voice was strained. "Captain, they are not breaking the lock. They are holding it. My system shows a solid track. They have a weapons-grade solution. This is not a warning." Miller stared at the blue horizon. "Start the timer. I want to know exactly how long they think they can hold this before someone pulls a trigger." The clock reached 30 seconds, then 40. The alarm continued to scream. It was a countdown to a war that no one was supposed to start. 7:24 in the morning, the South China Sea. The clock on the navigation display hit the 61-second mark. The high-pitched scream of the lock-on alarm had become a physical weight in the cockpit. It was a sound that usually lasted only moments. At 61 seconds, it was an eternity. It was the sound of a missile battery on Hainan Island that had finished its final checklist and was waiting for the word to fire. Captain Miller spoke over the internal system. "Electronic Warfare Officer. Report. Is there any sign of a break?" The EWO responded immediately. "Negative. They are staying on the rail. I am seeing secondary pulses from a separate tracking radar now. They are layering their coverage. They are not just watching us. They are building a high-fidelity target map for a multi-missile engagement." The pilot looked at his co-pilot. "We are not going to sit here and let them map our signatures. Initiate passive jamming. Let us see if they are willing to chase us through the noise." The electronic warfare officer flipped a series of guarded switches, initiating digital radio frequency memory. "I am generating a false target. Return 400 meters to our left. Let us see if their computer bites." On the radar screen in the Chinese command van, the single pulsing icon of the B-52 suddenly split into two. The primary return remained steady, but a second, identical signature appeared and began to drift away. The Chinese radar operator adjusted his controls. "Target is employing electronic countermeasures. They are using a repeater jammer. I am losing the primary track." The commander did not blink. "Do not follow the ghost. Increase the power of the main array to 90%. Filter the return for the original Doppler shift. They are trying to hide in the open. Do not let them." The power levels on the Chinese radar spiked. The energy being directed at the B-52 was now high enough to be dangerous to the crew if they were closer. It was a brute force approach to electronic warfare. The Chinese were refusing to be fooled. Thousands of miles away, inside the Joint Operations Center at Pacific Command in Hawaii, the atmosphere was electric. The room was a cavern of glowing blue screens and muted voices. On the main wall, a tactical map showed the lone icon of Scalpel 6-1. It was surrounded by a red ring, indicating it was under active target illumination. An admiral stood in the center of the room. He watched the data stream. "How long has that lock been active?" A duty officer checked his console. 1 minute and 45 seconds, sir. It is unprecedented. They are painting a strategic asset in international airspace with a lethal firing solution. The admiral turned to his communications officer. "Get me the carrier strike group. I want their cap airborne and moving toward the strait. I do not want them to engage. I want them to be seen. If the Chinese think they can isolate a bomber, we need to remind them what else is in the neighborhood." The officer nodded. "Yes, sir. I am notifying the USS Ronald Reagan. They have 4 F-35 fighters on the catapult now." Back in the sky over the strait, the B-52 began to vibrate. It was not the air, it was the sheer amount of electromagnetic energy hitting the airframes. The co-pilot looked at the warning panel. "Captain, we have a master caution. The radar energy is interfering with our flight control computers. We are starting to see system degradation." Miller looked at the timer. "They are pushing us. They want us to fire our active jammers. They want us to reveal our full electronic warfare suite." The pilot keyed his radio. "Control. This is Scalpel 6-1. We are being illuminated by a lethal track for over 2 minutes. We are experiencing system interference. Requesting permission to initiate active offensive jamming." The pause from the ground station was long, too long. The voice finally came back. "Scalpel 6-1. This is Control. Permission denied. Do not illuminate the mainland. If you paint them, they will have a legal justification to fire. Maintain course. Hold your nerve." The co-pilot looked at Miller. "They are going to let them shoot us down, aren't they?" The warning tone in the cockpit suddenly changed pitch. It was faster. More urgent. The EWO shouted. "Captain, new contact. I have multiple fast movers climbing out of Hainan, J-11 interceptors. They are coming up to meet us, and they are coming up hot." 7:26 in the morning. The northern reaches of the South China Sea. 2 Chinese J-11 fighters were already at 28,000 feet and accelerating. They were screaming through the thin air at Mach 1.2. The lead pilot, callsign Red Dragon 7, kept his eyes on the glass of his primary flight display. He was not using his own radar. He did not need to. The long-range battery on Hainan Island was feeding the precise coordinates of the American bomber directly into his mission computer. He was flying down a digital tunnel toward a target that was already locked. Inside the cockpit of Scalpel 6-1, the vibration was becoming a physical irritant. The sheer volume of electromagnetic energy from the Hainan radar was beginning to bleed into the internal communication lines. A low, rhythmic buzzing filled the crew's headsets. The electronic warfare officer spoke through the interference. Captain, the fast movers are at 30 miles. They are closing the gap at over 1,000 knots. They are positioned for a stern conversion. If they stay on this track, they will be on our wing in less than 90 seconds. Captain Miller looked at the co-pilot. Lieutenant Chen was checking the fuel state and the engine temperatures. His hands were steady, but his face was pale in the glow of the instrument panel. Miller keyed his radio. Control. This is Scalpel 6-1. We have 2 interceptors inbound. They are being vectored by the fire control lock. I am requesting an immediate change in rules of engagement. I need to burn that radar. I am losing my flight computers. The voice from Guam was distant and distorted by the electronic noise. Scalpel 6-1. This is Control. Negative. Your rules of engagement remain unchanged. You are in international airspace. You are to maintain a non-provocative profile. Do not radiate. Do not deviate from the flight path. Control. You do not understand, Miller responded. We are being electronically assaulted. If I do not break this lock, the J-11s will have a perfect firing solution before they even see us. Maintain your course, Scalpel, the controller replied. Help is on the way. 60 miles to the east, 2 F-35 fighters from the carrier USS Ronald Reagan were pushing their engines to the limit. They were call signs Reaper 1 and Reaper 2. They were flying in total electronic silence, their radars dark to avoid detection. They were receiving a high-speed data link from an E-2 Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft circling 100 miles behind them. The lead F-35 pilot, Commander Sarah Viper Vance, adjusted her oxygen mask. Reaper 2. This is lead. We are 2 minutes out from the intercept point. We are going to come in high and behind the J-11s. Do not arm your weapons unless I give the word. We are here to provide a distraction, not a provocation. Copy. Lead. The second pilot responded. I have the J-11s on my data link. They are pushing the B-52 hard. They are inside 20 miles now. Back in the Chinese J-11, Red Dragon 7 saw the American bomber through his long-range infrared sensor. It was a massive, heat-blooming ghost on his screen. He was 10 miles away. He moved his thumb to the weapons release button on his stick. He was not going to fire, but he wanted the American pilot to know that he could. He keyed his radio to the International Guard frequency. American bomber. This is Chinese Air Force. You are approaching a restricted zone. You are under a lethal track. Change your course immediately, or we will be forced to take measures. Captain Miller heard the voice. It was calm and professional. He looked at the timer. The lock had been held for over 3 minutes now. Steady, Miller said to his crew. No one moves. No one flinches. We are the most expensive piece of wood in the water. We wait. The J-11 fighters banked hard, pulling alongside the B-52. They were so close that Miller could see the pilot in the lead aircraft. The Chinese pilot turned his head and looked directly at the American cockpit. The 2 F-35 fighters were now only 20 miles away. They were descending from 40,000 feet like silent hawks. The sky over the Taiwan Strait was crowded with the most advanced weapons in the world. Every sensor was red. Every heart was racing. The situation was 1 heartbeat away from a kinetic exchange. 7:28 in the morning. Hainan Island and the Taiwan Strait. On the southern coast of Hainan, the mobile missile battery commander gave a final order. Cycle the rail. Initialize the guidance uplink. In the command van, the sound of cooling fans reached a high whine. On the launch vehicles outside, the massive canisters containing the surface-to-air missiles tilted upward. They were now at a 60-degree angle. The hydraulic hiss was masked by the sound of the ocean, but the electronic signature was unmistakable. The battery was no longer just watching. It was preparing to fire. Inside the B-52, the electronic warfare officer gripped the edges of his console. The steady scream of the lock-on alarm suddenly doubled in volume. A new, secondary tone began to pulse. It was slower and deeper. The EWO spoke, his voice tight. Captain, we have a launch active signal. They are cycling the rails. The Hainan battery is in the final seconds of a launch sequence. They are slaving the missile seekers to our position right now. Captain Miller did not blink. He looked out at the Chinese J-11 fighter only 50 feet from his wingtip. They are pushing us to the edge of the cliff. They want us to blink. Captain, the co-pilot said, if they launch, we have less than 40 seconds of flight time. At this range, we cannot outrun them. Miller keyed the internal comms. EWO, if that launch light goes solid, you have my permission to use everything. Burn their eyes out. I do not care about the rules of engagement anymore. We are not going down without a fight. High above the confrontation, Commander Vance in her F-35 watched the tactical display in her helmet. She saw the B-52 boxed in by the two J-11 fighters. She saw the red strobe on her HUD indicating the ground-based launch sequence. The commander spoke to her wingman. Reaper 2, this is lead. We are going to provide the counterweight. Master arm on. Paint the J-11s. Give them a taste of their own medicine. Copy, lead. Master arm on. The wingman replied. In an instant, the two stealth fighters ceased their electronic silence. They turned their powerful nose radars toward the Chinese fighters and blasted them with a focused beam of energy. Inside the lead J-11, the Chinese pilot, Red Dragon 7, jumped as his own cockpit erupted in warnings. His display showed two high-performance targets appearing out of nowhere directly behind him. He was being locked. The Chinese pilot spoke into his radio. Command, I am being targeted. Two American stealth fighters are on my 6, requesting permission to maneuver. The commander on Hainan Island saw the new contacts on his screen. The situation was spiraling. The American carrier was now actively participating. 100 miles away, the USS Ronald Reagan turned its massive SP-1 radar toward the coast of China. It was a billion-dollar hammer hitting the airwaves. The radar energy was so intense that civilian radio stations in the region began to experience static. The admiral in Hawaii watched the map. The red lines of the Chinese locks and the blue lines of the American counters were now a tangled web over the strait. They are all committed now. No one can back down without losing face. We are 10 seconds from a tragedy. In the cockpit of Scalpel 6-1, the air felt thick. Every light on the dashboard was flashing. The EWO yelled over the noise. Captain, the launch signal is going solid. The rail is hot. They are doing it. They are actually doing it. Miller stared at the Chinese pilot next to him. The two men looked at each other across a narrow gap of freezing air. Both had their fingers on the triggers. Both were waiting for a signal from a superior officer who was hundreds of miles away. The tension reached a breaking point. The next sound would either be a radio call or an explosion. 7:29 in the morning. The Taiwan Strait. The situation reached the absolute edge of kinetic reality. On the coast of Hainan, the missile battery commander received the final authorization from his regional command. A digital key was turned. On his screen, the icon for the American bomber turned from yellow to a pulsing, angry red. The commander spoke. Final guidance lock achieved. All launch parameters are met. Missile 1, stand by. 7:29 and 15 seconds in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Scalpel 6-1, the noise was unbearable. The electronic warfare alarm was no longer a tone. It was a physical vibration that felt like a needle in the ears of the crew. Captain Miller felt the sweat slicking his palms inside his flight gloves. He looked at the co-pilot. Miller spoke clearly. Electronic warfare officer, on my mark, you will initiate the blackout sequence. Burn the battery. Burn the fighters. Give us everything you have. The EWO gripped the trigger for the high-output jamming suite. Ready. On your mark, Captain. 7:29 and 30 seconds in the morning. High above, Commander Vance watched her targeting computer. The F-35 was a silent witness to the end of a peace treaty. The shoot cue on her heads-up display was flashing. She had the Chinese J-11 fighters boxed. If a missile left the rail on Hainan, she would fire within 2 seconds. Vance spoke into the secure link. Reaper 2. If they launch, we take the fighters immediately. Do not wait for my command. Defend the bomber. Copy. Lead, the wingman replied. I am Master Armon. I have a solid tone. 7:29 and 45 seconds in the morning. The Chinese pilot in the lead J-11 was struggling to maintain control. The electromagnetic field being projected by the USS Ronald Reagan was now so intense that his digital flight instruments were flickering. His cockpit was a chaos of warnings. He was being painted by the F-35 fighters behind him and blinded by the carrier to his east. He was a predator who had suddenly become the prey. He keyed his radio. "Command, I am blind. I cannot maintain the escort. The Americans are flooding the spectrum. Request instructions." The response from Hainan was a single word: fire. 7:29 and 55 seconds in the morning. Inside the B-52, Captain Miller saw the master launch warning go steady. The 61 seconds of the initial lock had grown into a countdown to a global conflict. He opened his mouth to give the order to jam. He was ready to blind every sensor in the region and begin the defense of his aircraft. Miller drew a breath. "Mark, initiate blackout. Now." 7:30 in the morning. The South China Sea. The command from Captain Miller was cut short. It was not silenced by his electronic warfare officer. It was silenced by a sudden and violent surge of static that drowned out the internal cockpit intercom. It was not the sound of intentional jamming. It was the sound of a total electromagnetic collapse. Every screen in the B-52 cockpit flickered. Then they went black. The primary flight display, the navigation computer, the electronic warfare suite. The scream of the lock-on alarm did not just stop. It vanished. The entire cockpit was plunged into a terrifying, primitive silence. "Status!" Miller shouted. His voice was muffled by his oxygen mask. He realized his headset was dead. The internal comms were non-functional. He looked out the side window. The Chinese J-11 fighter was still there, but it was no longer aggressive. The aircraft was wobbling in the air. Its pilot was frantically pawn-eyes, looking around his own cockpit, his hands moving across a darkened instrument panel. The J-11 had suffered the same fate. Its digital brain was gone. On the coast of Hainan Island, the command van went dark. The radar operator stared at a screen of static. The high-pitched whine of the cooling fans died. Even the emergency lights failed to trigger. The battery commander grabbed his handheld radio. "Report. Did the missile launch? Give me a status." There was no answer. The radio produced only the sound of empty air. Outside, the missile battery was frozen. The canisters remained tilted toward the sky, but the guidance uplink was dead. The missiles were blind. The soldiers stood around the vehicles, looking at the sky in confusion. The situation had shifted from the brink of total war to a state of total blindness. High above, Commander Vance in her F-35 felt her fly-by-wire system kick into a secondary backup mode. Her helmet-mounted display, the most advanced piece of technology in the world, went dark. She was flying a $100 million jet by looking out the glass and feeling the physical resistance of the stick. "Reaper 2, she called out. There was no response. She looked down through the canopy. The B-52 and the Chinese fighters were still visible. They were like ghosts drifting through a gray sky. None of them were maneuvering for a kill. They were all simply trying to stay airborne. It was not limited to the aircraft in the strait. Across the Pacific, the high-speed data link from the carrier USS Ronald Reagan vanished. The satellite feeds at Pacific Command in Hawaii turned to empty blue screens. The global positioning system was gone. The admiral stood in the center of the silent operations center. What happened? Did they use a pulse weapon? Did we? "Everything is down, sir," a duty officer said, his voice trembling. "It is not just our tactical nets. The civilian GPS is gone. The maritime distress bands are dead. Everything is dark, from Hainan to Guam." This was the pivot. The most highly instrumented piece of airspace on the planet had become a sensory vacuum. In the cockpit of Scalpel 6-1, Captain Miller reached for the manual trim wheel. He was now flying a 70-year-old bomber with his bare hands and his own internal cast. Sense of balance. He looked at the Chinese pilot only 50 feet away. The two men were no longer enemies. They were two human beings caught in a phenomenon they did not understand. The Chinese pilot leveled his wings. He made a slow and deliberate bank away from the bomber. He was not retreating in defeat. He was trying to find a landmark. He was trying to survive. Miller watched him go. He looked at his co-pilot. Lieutenant Chen was holding a paper navigation chart. It was the only thing in the entire cockpit that still functioned. The world was quiet, but it was a terrifying kind of quiet. 7:31 in the morning, the South China Sea. Captain Miller felt the heavy physical resistance of the manual flight controls. The B-52 was a massive beast of aluminum and steel. Without the electronic trim and the flight path enhancement computers, the aircraft wanted to pitch its nose heavily toward the horizon. Miller used his physical strength to keep the wings level. He looked at his co-pilot. Lieutenant Chen held a magnetic compass in his hand. It was a small backup device. He pointed toward the east. The pilot spoke loudly to be heard over the engine noise. "We are heading toward the open ocean. We need to get away from the coastline. We are flying by the sun now." Chen nodded. "I have no radio. I have no navigation. We are back to the 1950s. 10 miles away, the Chinese pilot in the J-11 was in a much more dangerous position. His aircraft was a high-performance interceptor designed for maneuvers that required constant computer corrections. Without his digital flight control system, the jet was aerodynamically unstable. Red Dragon 7 fought the control stick with both hands. He saw the American bomber turning slowly away. He did not follow. He could not follow. Inside the Chinese fighter, the pilot reached for his emergency checklist. He needed to find a way to reset his primary power bus. He looked at the empty ocean below him. The sense of mission was gone. It was replaced by the cold reality of a pilot alone in a dead machine. He was no longer a hunter. He was a survivor. Back in Hawaii, the Joint Operations Center was a tomb of silent screens. The admiral stood at the center table. He was looking at a paper map of the Pacific. The admiral spoke to his staff. If this was a weapon, it was perfect. But it hit us both. Check the solar weather reports from the last hour. If the sun just threw a flare at us, we are in a different kind of war. A technician ran into the room holding a printed message. "Sir, we have a report from a long-range cable station. The undersea lines are still active. It is not a total blackout, but the satellite layer is gone. Every satellite in high Earth orbit is unresponsive. The GPS constellation is offline." The admiral leaned over the table. "The Chinese battery on Hainan. If they had a missile in the air when the lights went out, where is it now?" The technician shook his head. "If it launched, it is blind. It would have self-destructed or fallen into the sea. But we have no way to confirm." In the sky, Scalpel 6-1 was a lonely shape against the clouds. Captain Miller watched the J-11 disappear into the haze. The 61 seconds of the lock felt like a memory from a different life. Now, he was just a man trying to find a landing strip in a world that had suddenly gone quiet. The pilot looked at the fuel gauges. They were mechanical. They were still working. "We have 4 hours of airtime," Miller said. "Let us see if Guam is still there." The tension of the combat engagement was gone. It was replaced by a deep, hollow uncertainty. Both sides were now reassessing the cost of their technology, and both sides were realizing how vulnerable they were to a power greater than any military. The crew sat in silence. The only sound was the roar of the 8 engines. It was a sound from a simpler era. 7:34 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The B-52 was a ghost ship. Without its digital heart, the massive aircraft felt hollow. The electronic warfare officer, or EWO, was working by the light of a small battery-powered flashlight held between his teeth. He was pulling circuit breakers and resetting the master power bus. Every few seconds, a spark would jump from the panel, casting long and jagged shadows against the bulkhead. The EWO spoke, his voice muffled by the light in his mouth. "Captain, I have partial power to the number 2 bus. I am trying to bypass the primary logic gates. If the surge was external, the hardware should still be intact. Captain Miller did not look back. He was focused on the horizon. The sun was higher now, a bright and unforgiving disk that turned the ocean into a sheet of hammered silver. Keep at it. We need a radio. We need to tell the world we are still here before someone decides to fill the silence with a second strike. The pilot knew the danger of the current moment. In the vacuum of information, military commands tended to assume the worst. If the Americans thought the Chinese had used a secret high-altitude electromagnetic pulse, they might authorize a counterstrike. If the Chinese thought the Americans had blinded them to mask an invasion, they would fire everything they had left. The 61 seconds of the radar lock had been a localized crisis. This blackout was a global one. 7:40 in the morning, the coast of Hainan. Inside the J-11 fighter, the Chinese pilot finally saw a flicker of life on his backup display. The screen was distorted and filled with rolling lines of static, but it was enough. He saw his altitude, 22,000 feet. He was descending. Red Dragon 7 adjusted his throttle. The engines responded sluggishly, but they were running. He looked to his left and right. His wingman was nowhere to be seen. He was alone in a sky that felt suddenly too large. He looked toward the east, where the American bomber had been only minutes ago. The space was empty. The Chinese pilot keyed his emergency transmitter. He used the international distress frequency. "This is Red Dragon 7. To any station. I am experiencing total system failure. I am disengaging. I am returning to base. Do not perceive my movement as hostile." He waited. There was no answer. Only the hiss of static that sounded like the ghost of a dead world. He turned his aircraft toward the Chinese mainland. He was no longer thinking about the mission or the sovereignty of the strait. He was thinking about the landing gear and whether the hydraulic valves would open without computer assistance. 7:50 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Ronald Reagan. The room was lit by emergency lanterns. The massive wall displays that usually tracked every ship and aircraft in the Pacific were dark. The sailors sat at their stations, their hands hovering over dead keyboards. The admiral stood by the central map table. He was looking at a handwritten log of the last known positions. "We have lost contact with the entire strike group. We are operating as an island. If the Chinese are moving, we won't know until they are on the horizon." A communications officer ran into the room. "Sir, we just received a burst transmission on the high-frequency band." It was unencrypted. It came from a Chinese tailcode. A J-11. The admiral leaned in. "What did it say?" The pilot reported total system failure, sir. He said he was disengaging. He sounded shaken. He said the same thing we are thinking. Do not perceive his movement as hostile. The admiral let out a long, slow breath. The tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. He is blind, just like us. This wasn't an attack. This was a catastrophe that hit everyone at the same time. He looked at the officer. "Broadcast, on all frequencies. Use every backup transmitter we have. Tell our ships to hold their fire. Tell Scalpel 6-1 to come home. We are not going to war in the dark." The mystery of the blackout remained, but the intent was clear. Both sides had been stopped by something neither of them could control. The crisis was not over, but the fire control locks were gone. 8 in the morning, 100 miles west of Guam. The cockpit of the B-52 was a cold and quiet place. The screaming alarms had been replaced by the steady, heavy breathing of the crew through their masks. Captain Miller had his feet braced against the rudder pedals. His shoulders ached from the constant physical effort of holding the massive bomber level against the shifting Pacific winds. Without the digital flight stabilization, every gust felt like a direct blow to the airframe. The electronic warfare officer finally pulled a master reset switch. A single green light flickered on his console. Then another. The primary radio bus hummed with life. It was a weak, staticky sound, but it was the most beautiful thing Miller had heard all morning. The EWO spoke into the newly active intercom. "Captain, I have the emergency high-frequency radio back. I am picking up a signal from Andersen Air Force Base. They are broadcasting on the guard channel. Miller nodded. Get them on the line. Tell them who we are. Tell them we are coming in heavy and we are coming in manual. The EWO keyed the transmitter. Andersen Tower. This is Scalpel 6-1. Do you read? Over. The response was immediate, though buried under a layer of solar interference. Scalpel 6-1. This is Andersen. We have you on primary search radar. We were about to launch a search and rescue flight. State your status. Andersen. We are manual flight only, the EWO replied. We experienced a total systems wipe. We have no navigation, no targeting. We are requesting a priority approach. We are currently 80 miles out. Copy. Scalpel. You are cleared for a straight-in approach to runway 06. We have the emergency crews on standby. The field is yours. 8:10 in the morning. Hainan Island. The Chinese missile battery commander stood outside his command van. He was smoking a cigarette, watching the steam rise from the cooling units of the radar array. The massive canisters were back in their horizontal transport positions. The hot status had been downgraded 10 minutes ago. His technicians were still working to replace fried circuit boards, but the urgency was gone. The commander looked at the sky. He knew that Red Dragon 7 had touched down at Hainan North 10 minutes earlier. The pilot had been forced to use a drag chute because his anti-skid brakes had failed. The aircraft was safe. The pilot was safe. A junior officer approached the commander. Sir, we have received a preliminary report from the Academy of Sciences. They believe it was an X-class solar flare. It hit the daylight side of the Earth at maximum intensity. The commander took a long drag of his cigarette. He looked at the radar dish. A solar flare. Nature decided to intervene where we could not. The officer hesitated. The Americans. They will think we used a weapon. No, the commander said. They are looking at the same sun we are. They are dealing with the same dead satellites. If we had used a weapon, their carrier would have fired back before the screens went dark. They stayed their hand, we stayed ours. 8:20 in the morning. Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. The B-52 dropped out of the low cloud layer. It looked like a giant, prehistoric bird returning to its nest. Its landing gear was down, locked in place by the manual emergency release. Captain Miller fought the crosswind. His eyes locked on the black ribbon of the runway. His eyes locked on the black ribbon of the runway. Gear down. Flaps at 30, Miller called out. Flaps at 30. The co-pilot confirmed. You are looking good, Elias. Bring her home. The massive tires hit the pavement with a plume of blue smoke. The aircraft bounced once, then settled. Miller pulled the throttles back to idle and felt the sudden, massive deceleration as the drag chute deployed from the tail. The bomber slowed, drifting toward the center line. As the aircraft came to a stop at the end of the runway, Miller let go of the control yoke. His hands were shaking. He reached up and pulled his oxygen mask away from his face. The air in the cockpit was stale and smelled of ozone, but it was the air of a world that was not at war. The co-pilot looked at the mission clock. 8:25. We were supposed to be back an hour ago. Miller leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. An hour ago, we were 61 seconds away from the end of everything. I will take the delay. The crisis was over. The airspace was clear. There were no victory cheers. There was only the professional silence of men who had seen the edge and chose to step back. 3 days later. The Pentagon and Beijing. The official report was titled The 61-Second Window. It was classified at the highest level of secrecy. It would not be released to the public for 30 years. Inside a windowless briefing room in the National Military Command Center, a group of senior officers sat in silence. They were watching a reconstructed digital animation of the event. On the screen, a red line represented the Chinese radar lock. A blue line represented the American jamming signal. For 61 seconds, those lines had overlapped. An analyst stood at the head of the table. His voice was tired. The data recovered from Scalpel 6-1 is conclusive. The Chinese battery on Hainan Island had reached a full automated engagement state. They were not just painting the target. The system was in a self-correcting fire control loop. If the solar flare had occurred 2 seconds later, the first missile would have cleared the rail. The heat signature would have triggered the F-35 fighters to engage the Chinese J-11 interceptors. By 7:30 and 5 seconds in the morning, we would have been in a state of general war. The admiral who had commanded the operation from Hawaii looked at the screen. And the flare. How certain are we of the timing? Absolute, sir, the analyst replied. The Goddard Space Flight Center confirmed an X-class solar ejection. It hit our atmosphere with enough force to collapse the ionosphere for 11 minutes. It was a 1,000,000,000 shot. It happened at the exact millisecond Captain Miller was about to initiate his own offensive electronic countermeasures. At the same time, in a secure facility in Beijing, a similar conversation was taking place. The commander of the Eastern Theater Command stood before a council of high-ranking officials. He held the flight records of the pilot known as Red Dragon 7. The commander spoke in a low, measured voice. Our pilots and our battery commanders followed their orders to the letter. They showed the strength of our sovereignty. But we have learned a dangerous truth. Our automated systems are now faster than our ability to control them. The Americans did not flinch. We did not flinch. It was only the sun that forced us to stop. One of the officials leaned forward. What is the assessment of the American response? They are professional, the commander said. They stayed on their track. They did not fire when they were painted. They showed the same restraint we did. This tells us that neither side is looking for a war. We are both looking for the edge of the other's resolve. There was no public outcry in the days that followed. There were no formal diplomatic protests. Both nations understood that they had come too close to a fire they could not put out. In the aftermath, the direct communication line between Washington and Beijing was tested 3 times in 24 hours. For the first time in a decade, both sides spoke with a new kind of quiet, urgent respect. The 61 seconds became a mandatory case study in military academies from West Point to Nanjing. It was taught as a lesson in the limits of technology and the fragility of modern deterrence. It was proof that in the age of hyperspeed weapons, the most important component of any weapon system is still the human being who decides when to stop. The tactical incident was over, but the strategic map of the Pacific had changed forever. Both sides now knew exactly how close the end could be. 1 week later, Washington and Beijing. The world remained unaware of how close it had come to a different history. To the civilian eye, the brief satellite blackout was a technical annoyance. It was a day of dropped calls and delayed flights. But in the halls of power, the silence was interpreted as a final warning. Strategic analysts would later refer to this event as the New Minute. In the Cold War, the world lived under the shadow of a doomsday clock. In the 21st century, that clock had been replaced by a digital timer, 61 seconds. That is the new margin of error for the human race. It is the time it takes for an automated system to identify, track, and prepare to destroy a target. The incident over the Taiwan Strait revealed a terrifying truth about modern deterrence. We have built weapons that operate at the speed of light, but we still possess the hearts of tribal warriors. When the fire control radar on Hainan locked onto Scalpel 6-1, it was not just a military maneuver. It was a test of psychological limits. Inside the Pentagon, a final assessment was drafted for the Secretary of Defense. The conclusion was sobering. The report stated that our technological superiority is a double-edged sword. We have integrated our sensors and our shooters into a single, seamless web. But when that web is torn, we are left blind in a high-speed environment. The solar flare did not just disable our satellites, it stripped away our hubris. In Beijing, the perspective was strikingly similar. The Chinese leadership recognized that their new long-range batteries were perhaps too efficient. The automation had removed the human pause. If the system says fire, the operator is trained to obey. The 61 seconds proved that we are nearing a point where the machine makes the decision before the man can understand the consequence. Captain Elias Miller was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross in a private ceremony at Andersen Air Force Base. There were no cameras. There were no press releases. The citation mentioned his extraordinary coolness under pressure during a high-value transit. It did not mention that he had looked into the eyes of a Chinese pilot and chose to hold his fire while a lethal alarm screamed in his ears. Miller returned to flight status 2 days later. He still flies the B-52. He still patrols the same contested corridors of the Pacific. But now, he looks at the sun with a different kind of respect. He knows that in a world of perfect sensors and instant kills, the only thing that saved us was a burst of plasma from a star 93 million miles away. The military analysis of the 61 seconds reached a final, philosophical conclusion. Peace in the modern era is not maintained by the strength of our armor or the precision of our missiles. It is maintained by the discipline of the individual. It is the pilot who refuses to flinch. It is the commander who questions the computer. It is the moment of hesitation that allows reason to catch up with technology. Modern warfare is often described as a game of chess played at the speed of sound. But as Scalpel 6-1 proved, the most important move is sometimes the one you choose not to make. The radar on Hainan Island powered up its rail and did not fire. The American bomber completed its checklist and did not jam. The sky returned to its natural blue. The sensors came back online. The digital world resumed its frantic pace. But for those who were there, the lesson remains. We are only ever 61 seconds away from the dark. And we must hope that when the next clock starts, there is still a human hand on the switch. Strategic assessment complete. Final thought. The most advanced weapon system in the world is still the human conscience.